Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, aka the Brick Archivist, and today we are continuing our series on the LEGO Bionicle fan and reviews. If this is your first time tuning in, we are going through every single fan-created canonized model in the entire Bionicle Generation 1 history and reviewing them one by one if they have instructions out or it's generally reasonable to be able to build them. Today we have a very exciting pick. It was the very first modern canonized model which was made for the TTV canonization contest. This of course is Toa Helryx, featuring the very first Toa ever created. You can see Helryx right behind me on the shelf there in blue, and now I will start this video off by saying that it was a highly controversial model. I will say that there are a few things that I feel like could be really improved with it, but I think the aesthetics are actually really good for what it's actually intending to display. So without further ado, let's jump into the review. I also want to make a note that the original creator of the Helryx MOC, the _double, used a blue Picari as the face of Helryx because the official mask of psychometry, which is the one that she wears, obviously was never made into a LEGO piece. So for the first portion of the contest, that was the MOC created with this mask, which is the one I will be reviewing in physical form. However, there was a secondary art portion of the contest which decided on the appearance of the mask, and I've actually 3D printed the canon model for the mask of psychometry. It was made by a user named Gav on Thingiverse, one of the more prominent Bionicle 3D model creators out there. And so you can see the shaping of this mask behind there. Gavla was the one that designed the model for this mask, although the drawing was made by someone else. And then I'll be quickly showing you a look at kind of how it looks on the figure. And obviously this doesn't really change my opinion on the build whatsoever. I just wanted to showcase that for viewers who are curious to see kind of what the canon mask would look like on the Helryx MOC. I did not actually have a Mata blue color of print material to use, so I just printed it in metallic blue. It's very close actually to the metallic blue color that LEGO actually used all the way back in 2002. And in my opinion, this is actually a really good looking mask, and it is pretty simple, but I think that really adds to the aesthetics of it, especially because this was modeled to look like the Technic block piece, which of course was the Throwbot or Roborider headpiece. So you can really see where it takes kind of the design aesthetic on the sides here and sloping out to the back. I actually really like how it kind of looks like you took this piece and translated it into a mask, which of course makes total sense because the Throwbots and Roboriders were the precursors to Bionicle. So it kind of makes sense that the original Toa, who featured ancient armor that modern characters in the Bionicle universe would not recognize, would kind of have a mask that evokes these early LEGO themes. It's kind of a bit of a meta commentary there. You can see how well the mask is shaped to allow the tubes to flow upwards towards the side, and that's something I really do appreciate about it, just how well this one looks. It is a little bit simple, as I said before, but it matches the drawing that was used almost perfectly, and honestly there's nothing I really would have wanted changed about how this mask works or how it looks on the figure itself. So there's the mask by Gavla on the Helryx MOC, and with that we can get started with the actual review. And now it's time to look at the very first canonized TTV model, the first Toa Helryx. So to give kind of some backstory to this character, Toa Helryx was the first Toa ever created, and over the course of her life she is very old, very ancient, and appeared to Takanuva wearing armor that he did not recognize, and it's said that she appeared quote-unquote disturbingly frail for a character of her stature. So in doing so, a lot of builders kind of tried to tackle the quote-unquote disturbingly frail aspect of the character, and to be honest, aesthetically, I think this one really just nailed exactly what that means. And so in the backstory, this character, alongside Hydraxon, trained the Toa Mata and essentially made them prepared into the warriors that they are today. So obviously a very pivotal character within the Bionicle storyline. She also leads the Order of Madanui, which is a secretive organization dedicated to enforcing the will of Madanui, especially after the Brotherhood of Makuta, which was the official organization to support Madanui, kind of broke off, started doing their own things. They got a little too ambitious after the war against the League of Six Kingdoms, where they realized that it was actually possible to overthrow Madanui. So this organization kind of stepped in to truly be the right protectors of Madanui and deal out his will how they saw fit. And for the most part, they were a generally good organization and made good choices. So it's kind of interesting. Obviously, a very interesting character here, and a character that became very important in the later years of the Bionicle story, despite having been around for centuries and thousands of years just in existence. So over the course of these reviews, I'll be reviewing this model, which was made by the _double, a user on the TTV message boards, on 4 major characteristics. That is articulation and posability. So essentially, how well can I get this into good poses, and can I actually move around the limbs pretty well? Building techniques. So this kind of encompasses both part usage and stuff that surprised me, and general stuff and pieces that were used to make it appear good. We have finally the overall aesthetics. So is this built well and looks good overall, and does this kind of stand out as a character? And number 4, which is how well does it fit in the universe and match the written descriptions as given by author Greg Farshtey. So what this kind of means is that I will be evaluating this metric on, for example, for this character, does it look quote-unquote disturbingly frail? Does she have armor that Takanuva, who is a normal Toa that kind of exists within the Bionicle universe, would not recognize, and so on. So we'll be taking a look at it through these 4 metrics, and let's now dive in and take a look at Toa Helryx. Alright, so here we are with Helryx. The first thing I do want to note is that I have made one very minor change to the model. I'm just missing a tube that snakes from this arm to the back. The reason for it is that these short tubes actually only appear in 2 sets in black. They come in 2 for one of these Star Wars sets, and then it comes in another creator set, which I did not own. And unfortunately, I don't honestly think that that's going to make a huge difference. I placed an order for the 2, but it hasn't arrived, and after several months, I kind of just gave up and figured I'd do the review without that 1 tube, because honestly, it doesn't make too much of a difference personally, but I will mention that just in case viewers who are strictly adhering to canon are wondering where that is. But otherwise, the model is 100% built accurate to how the instructions state. And starting off, let's take a look simply at articulation of this model. So obviously, if we start off with the legs, let's kind of get the arms out of the way first so we can really just see what's going on here. The legs have pretty much the standard amount of articulation. You can move it, the upper leg, pretty much on any axis right here. And then, of course, the knee, you do have a good amount of articulation, although the way that the knee is structured means that you can't really bend it any past this point. So you really can't get it in a sitting down pose or even moving the knee all too much, because you can move it on the front totally fine, but then once you get to the back, you can't really... Oh, there goes the arm. We'll get to the fragility of this model later, but you can see that you can't really move the knee past that. So it is a bit of a con not being able to do that, although to be honest, I don't know how the builder would have been able to add more articulation while still keeping this kind of aesthetic, so I do understand kind of the compromise used there. And then for the foot, you can basically just move it back and forth, but you can't really rotate it without kind of pulling the socket out. The way that it's done is that it's very much flush to the top leg here, so really you can just go like this, back and forth with the foot. You can't move it side to side, although to be honest, that doesn't bother me too much, because you don't really need the side to side articulation. I mean, you can rotate it on one axis like this, and you can move it up and down, and that's honestly really as much as you need. So I don't really find that to be a huge problem with it. And then moving up to the arms, the upper arms kind of give you a standard amount of articulation going back and forth and then up and down. The way that these are built, though, is kind of strange to me, because you can rotate it along this axis here, which is very loose. The way that this part is adhered is that it's just one of the Technic click hinges, which is stuck to one of these pneumatic T-pieces, so very easy for that to fall out unless you're careful. And I've actually had to wedge tissue in between all of these parts to make it stay in, which is obviously not something you really want to be doing. If you go around to the back, you'll see that's really obviously how I've kind of stuck tissue in, because simply I just could not get the pieces to stay in without it. And that was a huge con for me, to be honest, because the Mata heads on these shoulders just wouldn't stay in unless I wedged a lot of tissue in between to add some friction there. I mean, this is falling off already as it is. I'm going to have to add a little bit more to make that more secure. And overall, it's really very clear to me that this is supposed to be a display model and not a play model, because you really can't play with this without the arms falling off or other parts falling off, even by adding this extra tissue to add more friction. But then moving on, we have a fair amount of articulation in the elbow right here, a pretty much full range, which is nice to get. And then the hand, this arm keeps falling off. It's quite frustrating how this keeps coming off here, but the arm back on. The hand, you basically have the standard amount of articulation that the Toa Mata had in their hands, which I actually do appreciate the use of this part here, because this Mata hand makes total sense with Helryx being the first Toa. It makes sense that she'd use these kind of early pieces and kind of evoke the Toa Mata aesthetic. And the way that the mace is built is actually done very well, because you can't actually have this fall off. It's very much tightly restricted on, so you can kind of get this into some really fun poses and some good ways to kind of move this around while keeping the mace up. So I do appreciate how well it's able to hold that here. And moving on from this arm, which just keeps falling off, very frustrating. We have this other arm, which is built exactly the same way, except she has a Technic shield piece on here. These are actually the paneling pieces that were used on some of the older Technic sets, but it really works pretty well as a shield, to be honest. And you can see some of the extra tissue that I've added in the arm here really kind of helps this one stay on a lot better than this one, so I will be having to bulk that up a little bit. And then the head, you have basically the standard amount of articulation just going all the way around. You can't really move it to the side too much, because as you can see, the tube is going to fall off if you do so. So the tubes kind of have some trouble staying in. I do actually like the aesthetic with the tubes kind of running in here. It makes a lot of sense to me to have that kind of build for this. So that's something I do appreciate about this model. And honestly, that about sums up all of the articulation aspects of this model. You can see if we go around the back here, just very clearly how it's built, just very standard articulation around the sides. So it does make a lot of sense to me in universe having this, but that's all the articulation you have. And then talking about building techniques. So to be honest, I'm a little mixed on this one. So the prompt was to make the character disturbingly frail. And at that, I think that the_double, the builder, really succeeded in that regard, because you can see how skinny the legs are, how frail the arms look, but it still looks like this is a character who can do some serious damage with the cladded up lower arms here. You've got some armor on here, and then some armor around the heads with the Mata heads as shoulder armor, kind of giving it some pretty unique shaping here. So that is something I do appreciate in terms of the building techniques used. Although the one thing that I have to say is that the arms are really fragile. And I get that you want to make it look disturbingly frail, but it also is disturbingly frail as a build. It is literally disturbingly frail to me how easy it is to have this arm just quickly fall off. And I feel like maybe there is a better way to do this, or maybe there was some sort of compromise that could have been done that probably would have made this section of the arm a little bit thicker, but just made it a lot better as a build. But then again, of course, the canonization contest was for the appearance of the model. It was less so of how well it looks as a build and how easy it is to play with. So I totally understand why the builder would kind of want to go in that direction, because aesthetically, this is probably the skinniest you're going to be able to do and still make it look relatively reasonable. Going on towards the back, I just really appreciate the amount of original Bionicle and even pre-Bionicle pieces that were used here. The builder actually said that this was a very intentional design point, because this was, of course, the first Toa, so they wanted to mostly only build this out of pieces that existed around the 2001 to even the 1999 era. So you can see back here, you've got the Mata heads used as armor, you've got the standard Mata hands, the front of the torso is just the Mata foot, the front pieces here on the legs are the Robo Rider and Throbot Technic block pieces, so this even predates Bionicle having these pieces around. Of course, the shield is very early Technic and whatnot, and really the only modern parts that are used here are the tubes and the side armor pieces here. They were first used in the Baraki sets, but then the one in blue actually came in a Power Miners Wave 2 set, so that's where that one's from. And of course the mace is actually relatively made up of new pieces. These were introduced in the Knights Kingdom line, but still it's not like it's super modern pieces. I mean, you're not seeing any CCBS on here, that's for sure. So that is one thing I do appreciate. And then kind of we've shifted the conversation over from building techniques to the overall aesthetics, and I think it's important to mention aesthetics kind of in the context of what this character should look like. So this is the first Toa. She's seen a lot of battles. There are thousands of scars and pockmarks across her armor to showcase that. She is disturbingly frail because she's a very old character, but still able to fight, and one of the more mysterious members of the Order of Madanui, kind of the figure that's at the top of it all. So aesthetically, this looks good. Ignoring the fact that the arms are really loose and the pieces are very prone to falling off, aesthetically, this makes total sense to me. I think a lot of the contest entries with the Helryx contest kind of missed the disturbingly frail aspect or didn't really emphasize it that much, because I saw a lot of really great Toa builds and some builds that were arguably even better and more interesting than this build, but they failed to nail exactly what you were looking for in terms of depicting this character. The frailness and the fact that it uses old pieces to evoke that kind of pre-Bionicle and old feeling. The fact that Takanuva did not recognize a lot of the armor pieces used on this character makes a lot of sense to me, given that a lot of the pieces used, like these Roborider heads, predate Bionicles. So it's almost kind of like a meta reference within the world of LEGO and Bionicle itself. Of course, you wouldn't recognize it because Bionicle didn't exist by the time these pieces were created. So I really like how they kind of went into that angle, and of course the official canonized drawing of this model utilized a shaping of this piece to form her mask. Just overall a really nice thing to get. And now kind of continuing on to the fourth point, which is how much sense does it make in universe. I've already kind of touched on this a lot previously, but now let's bring over another Toa right here, Takanuva to be exact. And you know what I love about this build? It has a lot more articulation, but their heights are almost exactly the same. Helryx is the exact size of a Toa Mada size character, and I think that works out fantastically well, because of course she was one of the first Toa designed to be alongside their scale. So the scaling here matches up absolutely perfectly. I couldn't ask for anything better in depicting the canon model. So really well done here on the scale, and honestly there's not too many other things I can compare it against, but it just really makes sense to me that their heights are pretty much the same. And of course, if you look at the way Takanuva's sculpted, he looks a lot more, let's say, finished than this character, which makes sense because he's a Toa Nuva, and even the Toa Mada were a lot more finished than this character, who was just the first prototype of what a Toa would be. So very well done on fitting into the universe there, and I think that's the reason why it won the contest, is that it's because it fits in the universe so well. But now it's time for the final verdict on this model, and to me, I think that this really excels in the aesthetics and the fitting in the universe categories. So on those two categories, categories 3 and 4, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. Aesthetically, this looks great. I love the parts usage referencing the older Bionicle and Throbot and Technic stuff that they were doing with Construction. It makes total sense in universe that the character would look like this, so I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 on both of those. But then we get to posability and building techniques. And posability, I think that posability, it's actually pretty okay. I mean, if you tend to not mess with the arms too much, it's not like, say, the Melding Pterodax who can't even wield his weapon. You can get Helryx into a variety of cool poses without kind of compromising the stability of the arms, more or less. You can kind of see it drooping here, but I mean, if you kind of fiddle around with it, you can get it into good poses. And really, I think that the posability aspect of this is generally okay. Besides not really being able to bend the knees too much, the feet are pretty fixed, and the arms kind of have limited posability just to how fragile they are. I think overall this is a pretty well-posed model. So I'm going to give this one a 8.5 out of 10 on posability, only because of the knees, the way the arms are set up, and just generally how kind of fragile this is in terms of playing around with. But then we kind of get to the final point, which is going to be building techniques. And I think that, to be honest, this one kind of suffers a little bit. It's obviously a very basic build, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it fits within the aesthetics. It's supposed to be a basic build, and it's not like the user can't build complex stuff. I've seen other mocks that the user's made. He's made some really complex stuff. So this was very obviously an intentionally basic build, but in some ways I feel like the disturbingly frail aspect was taken a little bit too far. Again, the arm right here, just so easy for it to just fall off. I think it's really crazy to me how just you really can't get this into a good pose unless you, like if you notice here, I'm applying force here to be able to bend the arm. You really shouldn't have to do that when you're playing with an action figure character, and the fact that I had to stick tissue in to the joints here kind of really hurt the model, because the main thing is these Mata shoulder heads, without the tissue, they're just going to fall off if you look at it funny. There it goes, the arm. The lower half of the arm, the upper half of the arm, there's literally 3 points in which this could very easily detach here without having to add in a ton of friction or tissue or whatnot to keep them together. And it's not even a simple fix like weak ball joints that can be fixed with, say, an official Lego part like the friction adder. The issue here is just fundamentally in the way that these arms are built, they're fundamentally not sturdy and they're very prone to falling apart. And of course this will depend on the exact pieces you use, but I just had really bad luck with these pieces. They just keep falling off. So other than that, the building techniques are great. I think that the parts usage is really good and they make sense within the universe. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10 on building techniques. And I do think that that is kind of representative, really just sums up my complaints in the arms, but everything else is just so good that I'm willing to give it a relatively higher score on that end. That about sums up my review of Toa Helryx, one of the most interesting characters canonized throughout the contest, and I'm gonna have to say throughout all of the contest entries, this one was the one I was rooting for because it made so much sense to me within universe. So quibbles aside with the weakness of the arms and how certain things can't really bend too much, aesthetically, this is perfect for the character, and honestly, that's all I'm really looking for in a canonization contest, which is, of course, judging them based on their visual appearance. Before we move on and wrap up this video, I just want to pinpoint something that I think really fixes pretty much every single complaint that I mentioned in this video. On the TTV message boards, a user named Bucky, or Buki, sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, posted some pictures of their mods for a shadow version of Helryx. They did a breakdown of the shoulder and the legs, and as you can see in the photos here, and I plan on replicating this myself, this fixes quite literally every single one of the issues that I had in total. You can obviously easily bend and pose the arms while still retaining the aesthetics and actually not have the arms fall apart. You can bend the knees completely all the way just because of a very simple change which I really don't think detracts at all from the aesthetics. And really overall, those are my 2 biggest complaints about it, and this mock fixes both of them. And another user on the TTV message boards by the name of Kodiak took some really beautiful pictures of the Helryx with the 3D printed mask, implementing these mods outdoors, and I've thrown them up on screen here. All credit to him. They are far better than anything that I could have taken with the mock myself, so I will showcase these for the end of the video, and I would highly recommend that if anyone wants to build this on their own, they really should check out these mods and probably do it themselves, because you're really not losing anything in terms of aesthetics. You still have the same mock, but you're gaining so much in posability and stability, so this is honestly the more canon version of the mock to me. But I guess with that, we can about wrap up this video. Thank you so much for tuning into Duckbricks and checking out yet another canonized Bionicle model review. I really appreciate you if you've gone this far in the video. Hopefully you got some new things and learned some new things about Toa Helryx, and maybe this will help influence your decision as to whether or not you should order the parts for this character, because I will say, ordering it was not an easy task. The blue Technic blocks in particular were pretty hard to get because they only came in a very rare Technic set and a few other sets. But this was very worthwhile to build. I think that it's a very fine addition to the Bionicle collection. And here it is. I'm going to bring over the next canonized Bionicle model, Artaka. So you can see the difference in scale between them. But looking forward to making this review whenever my pieces for the hammer come in. I'm just waiting on it. It's been like 2 months now. So I'm just still waiting on the hammer for this guy, but overall, I'm very excited to bring you the next series in the Bionicle fan-created canonized model review series. Thank you so much for tuning into Duckbricks, and stay tuned for more LEGO and Bionicle news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks, and bye-bye for now.